What are you trying to do, huh? What do you think you're doing?
The command struck like a whip. Get her out. The words came from the head table, spoken without hesitation, carrying across the marble hall as if they had been rehearsed. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Glasses halted halfway to lips. Even the orchestra, hidden behind velvet curtains, faltered for a beat before their strings resumed in nervous silence. The billionaire CEO sat high-backed in a chair designed more like a throne than a seat. Around him, chandeliers burned in white fire, scattering light across polished floors and glittering gowns. Guests, politicians, investors, celebrities, watched in stunned disbelief as the target of his command became clear. A young black waitress standing with a tray of wine glasses. Her posture was upright, her grip steady. She had not stumbled or spilled. Her only mistake in his eyes was existing too near the circle of his power. Now, he added, sharper this time, as though the sight of her presence was an offense to the air he breathed. The silence deepened. One waiter shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her as if hoping she would obey quickly, make the moment disappear. But time had slowed. The music was distant. The chandeliers no longer glittered. They glared. The waitress did not speak. She did not beg. She simply lowered the tray, careful not to let a single glass tremble. On it rested one untouched glass of red wine, the surface still and unbroken. The glass seemed to carry all the weight of the moment, dignity held in fragile form. She turned, moving toward the edge of the hall. Guests avoided her gaze, some out of fear of the man at the head table, others out of shame for their own silence. Her footsteps echoed too loudly on the polished floor, a sound of quiet defiance cutting through the hush. At the table, the CEO leaned back with a satisfied smirk. To him, the world was a chessboard. People like her were pawns, dispensable and forgettable. His empire, built on steel and glass towers, had made him untouchable. Or so he believed. But the room itself seemed to rebel. Whispers began to stir along the edges. Eyes shifted, not to admire his command, but to measure it. Power could command silence, but it could not command respect. The untouched glass of wine was left behind on the tray, abandoned like a symbol the room could not unsee. It glowed crimson beneath the chandeliers, a still witness to arrogance displayed in public view. The waitress reached the doorway. She paused for half a second, shoulders squared, head high. She would not let the insult bow her frame. Then she stepped out, swallowed by the corridor's shadows. And then, without warning, something changed at the head table. The CEO's smirk froze. His hand, reaching for his own glass, faltered. His chest shifted oddly, as if an invisible weight pressed down. Around him, guests leaned forward, unsure whether to speak, to help, or to pretend nothing was wrong. The room, already stunned into silence once, now fell into a deeper stillness. The orchestra stopped entirely this time. The chandeliers seemed too bright, as though exposing every flaw and every hidden truth at once. Forks lay abandoned on plates. A cough broke the air, then a gasp. And in the space of 1 minute, the same minute that carried the waitress from humiliation to the hall's edge, the billionaire's body gave way. He hit the floor. The skyline was his mirror, tall, polished, and sure of itself. He had taken a shipping company and hammered it into a conglomerate. Steel, data centers, hotels. His initials were etched into beams and contracts. He wore success like a tailored coat. Boards bent when he entered. Rivals smiled in public and moved aside. People called him visionary. The word felt safe and clean. Staff who knew the late-night calls used another word in whispers. Ruthless. He liked marble lobbies and revolving doors that never slowed for the tired. He liked private elevators, key cards that turned red for others and green for him. He liked numbers because numbers did not argue. People argued. People asked for breaks, fair schedules, safe equipment. Numbers did not. The first lesson of his rise came in a storm. A cargo ship drifted toward rocks while he sat in a warm office far from the coast. Insurance covered the loss. He told the press the company would learn. Other people learned the cold of seawater that night. He learned something else. Pain looked small from a high floor. In meetings, he spoke as if gravity answered to him. He asked for impossible timelines, then praised the one manager who cut corners to make them. When a junior analyst challenged a report, he smiled and said, Confidence is the first KPI, and the room laughed to survive the moment. The analyst did not return. Charity dinners made him look generous. He lifted large checks for cameras, his signature wide. At the door, he reminded staff not to seat certain people near the stage. Optics, he said he viewed apologies as leaks. Leak once, the whole ship takes water. So he never leaked. The towers he built were mostly glass. He liked transparency as long as he controlled the blinds. In his headquarters lobby, the ceiling reflected the floor, and people walked between two versions of the world. Security guards stood like posts. Receptionists spoke in soft tones. Everything shone, yet nothing felt warm. He believed loyalty could be bought and silence could be staffed. Contracts bound partners. NDAs bound the rest. In this math, dignity had no line item. He did not notice its absence because the numbers still added up. There were, however, small scenes that did not fit the chart. A maintenance worker once asked for a slower pace after a near miss. He told the worker to drink more coffee and keep the line alive. A driver parked a company car in the shade to protect a client's child from heat. He called it misuse of assets and charged the man the fuel. A cafeteria attendant suggested cheaper meals for night staff. He said the margin was a teacher and moved on. These moments left no dents in the stock price. They formed a different kind of ledger. Quiet entries, unpaid. From the high floors, the city looked orderly. The glass made everything sharp, each angle clean. But reflections do not show what is missing inside a room. Power in his hands was an echo chamber. It repeated his voice back to him, louder each year, until it sounded like truth. And yet power often ignores dignity, until dignity forces its way into the room. Her hands never shook, not even when the room turned against her. She had learned early that steady hands could carry more than trays. They could carry hope, duty, and dignity. While others saw a uniform, she knew it was also armor. The black vest pressed, the white shirt buttoned, the small name tag fixed over her heart. It did not erase who she was. It reminded her she still stood. Her story did not begin in marble halls. It began in a small kitchen where the smell of fried onions lingered long after meals. A single mother worked 2 jobs, leaving her daughter to guide younger siblings through homework and bedtime. Bills stacked like towers no one admired. From that weight, the waitress learned calm. She became the steady one, the one who could fold clothes, soothe tears, and serve meals without dropping her own hunger. At school, she had been told more than once to stay quiet when raising questions. Quiet she remained, but not broken. She carried that same silence now, walking through luxury hotels where chandeliers burned with a brightness her family never switched on at home. The gap between worlds was sharp. The softness of carpet beneath guests' shoes, the cracks of worn shoes beneath hers. Yet in this hall she did not falter, even as the billionaire's words cut across the air, even as eyes shifted toward her, as if she were a mistake to be corrected. Her grip on the tray remained steady. Not a single glass tilted, not a drop of red wine spilled. The still surface of that wine became her silent answer, a reflection of restraint stronger than any spoken protest. The insult might have aimed to reduce her. Instead, it revealed her strength. She did not lower her gaze, though many expected it. She moved with control, every step measured, every breath even. She had been through harsher nights. Nights when the fridge held nothing. Nights when the electricity flickered off. Nights when she sat awake counting coins and courage. Compared to that, one man's arrogance was small. Some of the guests avoided her eyes. Others glanced quickly, almost guilty, as though they knew the weight of what had been done but lacked the courage to stand beside her. That silence, too, was familiar. She had grown up around silence. Neighbors who heard shouting but did not intervene. Teachers who noticed empty lunches but said nothing. She knew how to walk through silence without letting it devour her. The tray, once heavy, now seemed symbolic. It carried not just wine but the unspoken balance between humiliation and poise. By keeping it level, she reminded the room, and herself, that dignity is not handed down by wealth. It is carried within. At the doorway, she paused. The corridor stretched before her, dimmer than the hall, yet less suffocating. She inhaled, shoulders squared, chin lifted. From there, she could still see the untouched glass of wine resting on the tray she left behind. It stood like a witness glowing under chandelier light, untouched and unbroken. She stepped outside, not broken, watching. The longest minute began with a smirk. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, pleased with himself. He had cleared the room of a presence he deemed unworthy, and the hall once again belonged to him. His glass of wine waited at his side, glimmering in the chandelier light like a trophy. Guests shifted uneasily, some forced smiles, pretending the insult had not stained the air. Others whispered behind folded hands. The orchestra's strings, meant to glide across the evening, now sounded thin, as though the bow trembled on the strings. At the far edge of the hall, the waitress's absence was a quiet echo. She had walked out with steady steps, but her dignity lingered like a shadow across the tables. The untouched glass she left behind still glowed, a silent witness no one could ignore. The CEO raised his chin. His smile was not of joy but of conquest. He relished the silence as proof that his word remained law. Around him, servers resumed moving, though their eyes darted nervously. Power had commanded obedience once more, but then a shift. It was small at first. His hand, reaching for his wine, paused halfway. His shoulders tensed. The triumphant grin froze in place, no longer effortless. He blinked, as if clarity itself slipped from his view. The whispers in the hall grew sharper, though no one dared voice concern. A fork slid from a guest's hand, clattering against porcelain. The sound was louder than it should have been, breaking through the tension like a warning bell. The CEO steadied himself, trying to sit upright. His pride fought harder than his body. For a moment, he seemed to wrestle gravity itself, refusing to bend, refusing to fall. But gravity does not negotiate. A cough, then a gasp from somewhere near the stage. Guests leaned forward, their silence heavier than any words. The orchestra stopped mid-note. The room, built for spectacle and command, now became a theater of suspense. Each second stretched long, every breath drawn by the crowd waiting, watching, and then it happened. The man who believed himself untouchable gave way. His frame pitched forward. The chair that had supported him for years of banquets and contracts slid back, useless. He hit the floor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one spoke. The chandeliers shone mercilessly, casting light over power stripped bare. In that single minute, arrogance had risen to its highest point, only to meet the pull of earth. The silence that followed was not the silence of respect. It was the silence of reckoning. Arrogance had met gravity. And gravity had won. The velvet curtains swayed, hiding more than they revealed. Within minutes of the collapse, the hall transformed. What had been a stage for wealth and power now became a chamber of suspicion. Guests no longer admired chandeliers or sampled desserts. They leaned close, whispering theories, their words sharp as glass. Uniformed paramedics pushed through the gilded doors, their movements brisk but controlled. They bent low beside the fallen billionaire, their voices clipped, their hands efficient. A monitor beeped. A mask covered his face. Yet for all the skill in the room, the air was heavier with rumor than with oxygen. Police officers followed, dark jackets brushing against velvet drapes. Their presence was a signal. This was no longer an accident until proven otherwise. They asked quick questions, recording names, noting the order of events. Some guests spoke eagerly, eager to appear helpful. Others shrank back, fearing association. The hierarchy of the room had shifted. Influence no longer sat at the head table. It lay on the floor under scrutiny. Speculation bloomed like wildfire. A man near the stage muttered about poison, pointing at the untouched glass of wine. A woman in pearls insisted it was the heart. Too much stress, too many late nights, she whispered, as if the body confirmed her guess. Others spoke of karma, justice arriving in the silence he had once demanded. But the detail no one ignored was this. Moments before the collapse, he had humiliated a waitress. That story spread fast. One guest described her steady hands, another her quiet exit. Some said she had looked almost defiant, though not a word left her lips. A narrative began to form, woven from fragments. The insult, the untouched glass, the sudden fall. The velvet curtains framed it all, heavy and theatrical. They seemed to hold secrets in their folds, concealing truths while the crowd searched for answers. The fabric muffled sound, making every whisper feel louder, every rumor more dangerous. The untouched glass of wine still resting on its tray became a symbol in itself. Guests glanced at it nervously, as though it contained both question and answer. One officer lifted it carefully, sealed it in a bag. Cameras flashed. Even in silence, the wine spoke. Was it innocent or was it evidence? Yet the investigation found no clarity. Every possibility remained open. Poison, failure of the heart, or a twist of fate. It was all on the table. No one dared claim certainty, though everyone carried an opinion. The waitress's name was requested, her role logged, her exit time written down. Some guests whispered she would be accused. Others argued she was simply a witness. In truth, no one knew. But dignity, once ignored, now stood at the center of the storm. Outside the hall, sirens wailed faintly. Inside, the air remained thick, not with music or laughter, but with suspicion and unease. The velvet curtains, drawn back slightly, allowed a sliver of night air to creep in. It felt colder than before, as though justice itself lingered beyond the door. The evening had begun as a celebration of power. Now it was a stage for doubt. Every detail, the fallen man, the silent glass, the humiliated waitress, formed a puzzle no one could solve. The question hung heavy, unanswered and unstoppable. Was this justice, coincidence, or consequence? The empire of glass towers began to crack the moment he hit the floor. Reporters circled the story within hours, their cameras flashing against steel and marble. Headlines did not speak of shipping routes or profit margins. They spoke of collapse. Television anchors used sharp words: mystery, scandal, humiliation. In every segment, his fall was tied not only to his health, but to the insult that had preceded it. The contrasts could not be ignored. On one side stood his empire, wealth counted in billions, contracts across continents, towers rising in the name of progress. On the other side stood a waitress, nameless to the public at first, but remembered for her steady hands and quiet exit. The gap between them had once looked unbridgeable. Now it defined the story. Investigative reports began to paint competing pictures. Some analysts insisted it was simple: heart failure brought on by age and stress. Others raised suspicions of poison, citing the glass of wine sealed in evidence. No proof appeared, only speculation. In this uncertainty, the waitress became the figure the media returned to again and again. Clips replayed the moment of humiliation. Witnesses described it with variations. She never flinched. She just walked out. Her hands, steady as stone, the fragments built a portrait of dignity that stood in stark contrast to the arrogance on display before the fall. Meanwhile, the CEO's empire faced pressure. Stock prices dipped. Board members whispered about succession. Lawsuits from workers, once buried in courts, resurfaced in the headlines. The image of strength he had curated began to unravel, thread by thread, exposed not by a rival, but by a single act of cruelty seen too clearly. The media leaned into the symbolism. Newspapers placed photos of glass towers beside the untouched glass of wine. Commentators spoke of contrasts: power versus humility, command versus silence, arrogance versus dignity. The story was not only about a man's collapse. It was about the imbalance between what power builds and what character sustains. Interview fragments filled the airwaves. Was she involved? One anchor asked a guest. "There's no evidence of that," came the reply. Her role was service, not sabotage. Then why do people link her to the fall? Because she stood straight when he tried to bend her. The waitress herself remained quiet, granting no interviews. Yet her silence carried weight. While the empire scrambled to protect its image, she returned to ordinary life, working shifts, caring for family, carrying herself with the same composure that had marked her exit from the hall. The contrast deepened. His glass towers reflected light but not warmth. Her simple steadiness reflected truth people could trust. His empire, once untouchable, now looked fragile. Her dignity, once overlooked, now looked indestructible. But answers remained elusive. Experts disagreed. Police offered no final cause. Lawyers filed motions. Rumors swirled. Was it a poisoned glass, a broken heart, or fate itself intervening? No report could settle it. The truth of what brought him down stayed hidden behind the velvet curtains of that night. Yet the weight of the story grew heavier with each retelling. The world may never know if it was justice, coincidence, or consequence. But it knew this: power had stumbled and dignity had stood firm. The world waited for her voice, and at last she spoke. The interview was set in a modest studio, far from the chandeliers that had framed her humiliation. There were no velvet curtains here, no marble floors or crystal glasses. Just a chair, a microphone, and the quiet weight of expectation. Cameras focused not on wealth or power, but on the face of the woman who had walked out with steady steps when the billionaire ordered her away. She sat upright, hands folded calmly in her lap. There was no flash of anger in her eyes, no performance for the cameras. Only composure. The same composure that had carried her through the moment now burned into headlines. The interviewer leaned forward. "Tell us what happened that night." Her voice was even, without hesitation. "I was ordered out," she said. She paused, letting the words stand in the air. They did not need dressing. They carried their own weight, and I walked with my head high. It was a sentence simple enough for anyone to understand, yet it cut sharper than any accusation. That single line, she transformed the narrative. She was not a victim, not a conspirator, not a pawn in rumor. She was a witness to her own dignity. The interviewer pressed for more. Did she feel anger? Did she want revenge? She shook her head. No, anger does not feed my family. Revenge does not build a future. What I have is my dignity, and I chose to keep it. Her words traveled far beyond the studio walls. Clips spread across screens and timelines. Commentators replayed her calm tone, noting how she refused to stain her story with hatred. Some called it restraint, others called it strength. For many watching, it was both. She spoke too of her life outside the hall. I grew up where work was never optional. My mother worked until her hands ached. I learned to carry more than trays. I learned to carry responsibility. That night was not the hardest thing I have faced, but it was the clearest. I saw how power treats people when it thinks no one will remember. The interviewer asked about the glass of wine, the symbol now tied to countless theories. She answered carefully. I carried it like I carried every other glass. It was left untouched. The truth about it is not mine to explain. What I can say is that my hands stayed steady. The phrase echoed across headlines. My hands stayed steady. It became the counterweight to the empire's collapse, a reminder that dignity can outlast wealth. The rising conflict of the story did not shake her. Even as others argued poison or heart failure, guilt or fate, she refused to speculate. That is not my judgment, she said plainly. What I know is this. I walked out and I did not bow my head. Her clarity contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding the billionaire's empire. Lawyers fought, investors panicked, and reporters filled pages with speculation. Yet her voice, restrained and simple, brought more moral weight than all their arguments. The climax of the interview came when she was asked what she wanted the world to remember. She lifted her eyes, steady as ever. Remember that no one can take your dignity. They can try to shame you, push you aside, order you out. But you decide how you walk away. Silence followed. Long, respectful silence. In the days after, her words spread further than his towers ever had. People repeated them in workplaces, classrooms, and homes. The story was no longer only about a fall. It was about a stand, dignity, spoken aloud. Had cut sharper than accusations. The towers that once bore his name now stood like mirrors cracking under their own reflection. What began as a single collapse in a banquet hall spread outward into courtrooms, offices, and headlines. Within days, lawsuits emerged. Claims long buried in silence now resurfaced with fresh urgency. Former employees stepped forward, recounting stories of corners cut, warnings ignored, dignity dismissed. Each voice chipped at the facade he had built. The board of directors convened in urgent meetings. The room that had once echoed with his commands now sat heavy in silence. Financial charts flickered on screens, numbers plunging. Shareholders demanded explanations. Investigators pored over contracts, tracing shadows of deals struck in haste. The empire that had promised stability suddenly looked fragile, as if one stone pulled loose had set the entire structure trembling. Media outlets carried the contrasts with precision. Images of his skyscrapers, glass shining in daylight, were paired with headlines about inquiry and scandal. Reporters spoke of towers of ambition now under siege. Editorials asked how wealth so vast could rest on a foundation so thin. Each column felt like another fracture spreading across glass. The waitress's voice, captured in her interview, echoed louder than the Empire's defenses. "I walked with my head high," she had said. Her words, calm and unadorned, were replayed beside footage of board members avoiding cameras and lawyers offering no comment. The weight of her dignity pressed against the emptiness of their denials. Inside the company, loyalty dissolved. Managers once quick to praise now distanced themselves. Partnerships wavered. Regulators moved in with questions that carried the force of law. The empire was not destroyed in a single blow. It was undone by exposure. Each layer peeled back to reveal hollowness beneath. The symbolism was clear to all who watched. Glass, admired for its shine, is also fragile. His towers had been built to impress, to reflect power. Now they reflected doubt, scandal, and the faces of those who no longer believed. In public squares, the contrast deepened. Protesters held signs quoting the waitress's words. Commentators called her the steady witness. Her composure became a symbol stronger than stock prices, stronger than contracts. And so the collapse stretched beyond his body. It became his legacy. Not the wealth amassed, not the towers raised, but the reckoning that followed his fall. One image captured it best: a silent boardroom, chairs lined in neat rows, screens glowing with losses no one could deny. Across the city, in homes and on phones, the waitress's steady truth replayed, carrying clarity through the noise. Silence filled the boardroom. Her voice filled the world. Justice did not arrive in a gavel strike or a shouted verdict. It arrived in silence. The debate never ended. Analysts argued over medical reports. Commentators speculated about sabotage. Lawyers built cases on possibilities. But the truth of what brought the billionaire to the floor remained sealed in uncertainty. Fate, failure, or hidden hand. No explanation could claim the final word. And yet clarity existed elsewhere. It was not in the cause of his fall, but in the contrast it revealed. On one side stood arrogance, wealth displayed like armor, authority exercised without restraint. On the other side stood dignity, a woman ordered out, walking steady, refusing to bow. The world remembered both, but it admired only one. Her face never filled billboards. She did not publish books or stand on stages. She continued her life quietly, working shifts, supporting family, keeping her composure. But her words, simple, unpolished, unwavering, echoed across boardrooms and breakrooms alike. I walked with my head high. Those words became more than a defense of one night. They became a lesson. In classrooms, teachers quoted them. In workplaces, employees repeated them when facing insults. In homes, parents used them to remind children of what cannot be stolen. Meanwhile, his empire fractured. Contracts dissolved. Towers stood but no longer impressed. What he had built with power was remembered with suspicion. What she had carried with poise was remembered with respect. Symbolism hung everywhere. His glass towers reflected emptiness. Her steady hands reflected strength. His smirk became an image of arrogance before a fall. Her exit became an image of dignity that endures. The climax of this story was not the collapse itself. It was the recognition that justice does not always appear in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it appears in the smallest actions, in a tray carried level, in steps taken without bowing, in silence held against insult. For those who looked deeper, the meaning was undeniable. Justice was not in proving poison or fate. It was in exposing arrogance, in lifting dignity, in showing that power can fall while truth stands. And so the story closed not with certainty but with weight. The waitress did not need to win in law to win in memory. Her quiet strength spoke longer than any verdict. Sometimes justice does not shout. Simply stands steady while power falls.